Have you ever found proof that you weren't okay? Not a memory or a conversation, but actual proof. The other day, I was cleaning my room and going through some old notebooks to see which ones were worth keeping. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect. Random notes, half-finished ideas, and things that made sense at the time but don't mean much anymore. But one notebook caught my attention. As I flipped through it, I found a page dated February 21st, 2024. At the top, I had written a simple title, My Thoughts. I stared at it for a moment because I genuinely didn't remember writing it. It wasn't even that long ago, but it felt like it belonged to a completely different version of me. Then I started reading. A couple years ago, life wasn't going the way I thought it would. Like a lot of people, I graduated believing that if I worked hard enough, things would eventually fall into place. You get your degree, find a decent job, start building a life, and slowly move forward. At least, that's what I thought would happen. Instead, I struggled to find employment after graduation. I sent applications everywhere, got rejected more times than I could count, and eventually moved to a bigger city because everyone said that's where the opportunities were. More jobs, more companies, more chances, at least in theory. Eventually, I ended up working at a customer service call center, and I don't say that to disrespect anyone who works these jobs. I know firsthand how difficult they can be, but at that point in my life, it felt like the exact opposite of where I thought I'd be. Every day, I dealt with frustrated customers. A few were kind, but a majority of them weren't. The work wasn't fulfilling, the pay wasn't great, rent felt expensive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was falling behind. What bothered me most wasn't even the job itself, it was the lack of direction. I didn't know where I was headed. I didn't know what I was building toward. I felt like I was working, paying bills, going through the motions, and repeating the same cycle over and over again. Looking back, I think that feeling of being stuck was what weighed on me the most. And then I got to the notebook entry. The very first sentence said, I think I am depressed. Reading that hit me harder than I expected. I remember being very unhappy. I remember being very frustrated, but seeing those words written down reminded me of how much I was struggling at the time. As I kept reading, it got heavier. I wrote about hating my job, my salary, my rent, and the customers I dealt with every day. At one point, I even wrote, if this is what it means to live longer by suffering more, I would rather quit. And that line stopped me, because that's not something you write after one bad day. That's something you write when you've been carrying the same feelings around for a long time. What struck me most was how honest it was. There wasn't any attempt to sound wise or no effort to turn my struggles into a lesson. It was just a tired guy writing exactly how he felt, and I think that's why the entry stuck with me. Because while the details were specific to my life, the feeling wasn't. I think a lot of people know what it's like to feel stuck. Maybe you're in a job you don't enjoy. Maybe you're struggling financially. Maybe you're doing everything you're supposed to do and still wondering why things aren't getting better. Or maybe you're simply exhausted from waiting for your life to move forward. I think most people feel that way more than they let on. The part that surprised me most, though, was the ending. After writing about everything that felt wrong in my life, I listed the few things I still had going for me. My family, some friends, the gym, and video games. Back then, I wrote those things almost as an afterthought, as if they weren't enough. But reading it now, I see it completely differently. Those weren't small things. Those were the reasons I kept going. The version of me writing that notebook thought he barely had anything. The version of me reading it now realizes he had more than he knew. And maybe that's the biggest thing I took away from finding that page. The person who wrote those words had absolutely no idea what was coming next. He didn't know what opportunities would eventually appear. He didn't know which worries would disappear and which problems would become smaller with time. All he knew was how bad things felt at that moment. And I think that's true for all of us. When we're in the middle of a difficult chapter, it's easy to believe that the whole story is complete. It's easy to believe the way things feel today is the way they'll feel forever. But reading that notebook reminded me of something else. The person who wrote, "I think I am depressed." The person who wrote, "If this is what it means to live longer by suffering more, I would rather quit." He was convinced that life would always feel that way. He was wrong, not because those feelings weren't real, they were, but because that moment wasn't the end of the story. It was just a page. Sometimes I wonder how many people are carrying around their own version of that notebook right now. Maybe it's not a notebook. Maybe it's a note on your phone, a journal entry, a repressed thought you've never told anyone. Something that captures exactly how lost, exhausted, or overwhelmed you feel at this point in your life. If this is where you are right now, I hope you remember something I didn't know back then. Just because you can't see the next chapter doesn't mean it isn't coming. One day, the things keeping you awake at night might become memories. One day you'll look back and you realize you survived a season of your life that felt impossible while you were living through it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be grateful that you wrote down your thoughts that day so you could look back and reflect on how far you've come. Because I assure you, things will get better as long as you keep working toward it. Thanks for watching, Rardo. Thanks for listening to my story, and I'll see you in the next video.